This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. Welcome everyone to Atomic Biscuits 2024-1208 Arrested Landing. I'm going to start out this week over at msn.com. I know, this is not an outlet I would normally cover. I think it's important for us to get a broad spectrum of what's being broadcast out there. It helps us to understand how people arrive at the crazy ideas that they have when they are stuck on mainstream media. Explainer, what is the legal effect of President Biden's pardon of his son, Hunter? It's a story by Tom Howells, written, I believe, over on Reuters and then picked up by the Microsoft outlet, msn.com. U.S. President Joe Biden pardoned his son Hunter after repeatedly pledging not to. Below is a look at the circumstances leading up to the pardon and its legal consequences. What did the pardon cover? Hunter Biden was pardoned for his conviction by a jury in Delaware and a guilty plea in California. Hunter Biden was also pardoned for federal crimes, quote, he committed or may have committed, end quote, between January 1st, 2014 through the end of this year, a whole decade. What crimes was Hunter Biden convicted of? A Delaware jury in June found the president's son guilty of lying about his addiction to illegal drugs on a disclosure form that is required to purchase a firearm. The trial included hours of embarrassing testimony about Hunter Biden's addiction to crack and reckless behavior. He was scheduled to be sentenced on December 12th. Biden separately pled guilty to criminal charges of failing to pay $1.4 million in taxes while spending lavishly on drugs, sex workers, and luxury items. He was scheduled to be sentenced on December 16th. What sentence was Biden facing? He was facing decades in prison, although sentencing guidelines suggested he was likely to receive a much less severe punishment. For the gun charges, sentencing guidelines are 15 to 21 months, although legal experts said defendants in similar situations receive shorter sentences and are less likely to be incarcerated if they abide by the terms of their pretrial release. Hunter Biden's attorney had told the judge that he was complying with the terms of his bail, which included drug testing to show he was not using illegal drugs. A juror told CNN after the trial they did not think Hunter Biden belonged in prison. Wasn't there a plea deal? Yes. In June last year, Hunter Biden agreed to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor charges of willfully failing to pay income taxes and an agreement that would have spared him a conviction on a gun-related charge. The agreement prompted accusations by Republicans that Hunter Biden is receiving favorable treatment as the president's son. A federal judge questioned the breadth of that agreement and declined to accept it, paving the way for Hunter Biden's trial on gun charges. Could Hunter Biden be called to testify in another case? If the U.S. House of Representatives or the Justice Department decides to probe the Biden family business dealings, as some Republicans have promised to do, Hunter Biden could potentially be called to testify. Before he was pardoned, he could have declined to do so, citing his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The pardon could limit his ability to invoke that right because he no longer faces criminal jeopardy for any federal crimes committed during the period covered. Presidential pardons do not protect people from prosecution for state crimes. Are presidential pardons unusual? No, presidents beginning with George Washington, the first U.S. president, have granted pardons. Gerald Ford pardoned his predecessor, Richard Nixon, who had resigned in disgrace. Bill Clinton pardoned his brother-in-law, and Donald Trump pardoned Charles Kushner, a real estate developer and the father of Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Well, this soft peddling of what happened is exactly why The people on the left don't know what's going on.
They just think the far left has gone so nutty on so many issues.
That's what they're being told.
That's what
by people like you.
Because it's true. You think the far left does nothing crazy?
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Oh, well then.
But I don't know. Who is the far left? What do you mean when you say far left?
I mean, I could give you a million examples.
Yeah, well, give me one.
Okay, the NAACP.
You think the NAACP is far left?
Could I finish my sentence?
Yes.
You asked me for an example.
Yeah.
The NAACP last year issued a travel advisory. That's like the State Department does to go to, I'm sure when you went to Vietnam, they were advising you not to. There's a war on it.
I didn't talk to them. I don't have no.
I know, but a travel advisory.
Yeah.
Today we have them for very dangerous countries.
Yeah.
Don't go to North Korea. Don't go to Iran.
Yeah.
You know where they issued a travel advisory for black people not to go?
Yeah.
Florida. Every day there's stories like that that just makes people roll their eyes and go, are you people nuts? Even if they don't matter that much, I don't think one person listened to this and thought, I can't go to Florida. But they just suggest something to the average person, which I completely understand, which is, wow, do you people ever find anything that's ridiculous? Do you really think men can get pregnant? That kind of stuff. And I understand that a trans woman can get pregnant. That's different than a man getting pregnant. And the way they sort of insist on blurring that line is if that's some sort of reasonable social cause, as opposed to just being for having full rights, respect, and protection for trans people. We get that.
So I've never heard about men getting pregnant. I've never heard about this argument. It must be some part of what you call the far left that is so minuscule that I, who am...
No, Jane.
What?
It's not minuscule, and I'm sorry, you can't throw this back on us. I assume it's because you are locked into media that just never wants anyone in their audience to know anything sketchy about the blue team.
Well,
and that's.
I mean, I don't know. I read two papers, and maybe I don't. I should watch Fox News.
No,
I guess
I don't watch Fox. That's too far. But you don't have to. I'm not going to torture myself.
Over at Semaphore.com, Liz Hoffman posted this article. Investors have been scrambling to keep up with the U.S. president-elect, including some capitalizing on the political moment, testing how long the Trump trade will last. One of the latest examples, described in a recent pitch to prospective venture investors as, quote, an S&P 500 fund without the woke shit, end quote. The Azoria Meritocracy ETF will shun companies that use diversity quotas in hiring or promotion. The fund is a bet on the Trump economy and the broader backlash to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts that the president-elect tapped into on his way to victory. It will launch early next year under the ticker SPXM, said Azoria's co-founder, James Fishback. MAGA is already taken as a ticker. The country just wholeheartedly rejected DEI affirmative action, he said in an interview. We're going to deliver that mandate to the private sector. These practices are not just unethical, but bad business. Fishback is a 29-year-old college dropout turned Wall Street trader who Vivek Ramaswamy, himself a pioneer in the anti-woke investment war, has called a major Gen Z star in our pro-American movement. Ramaswamy and Elon Musk are now leading Trump's government efficiency effort. Fishback is best known for a bizarre and ongoing fight with his former employer, David Einhorn's hedge fund Greenlight Capital. What began as a spat over Fishback's title and contributions to Greenlight's investment returns escalated into dueling lawsuits and online trolling that has bemused Wall Street since the spring. The dispute is now in arbitration. Azoria is finalizing a roughly $25 million venture round. People familiar with the matter said. Fishback declined to name its financial backers, but said they include two prominent conservative-minded California venture capitalists and several family offices. The fund is playing for a slice of the $16 trillion that's invested in funds that mirror the S&P 500. It will buy all the stocks in the index except for companies that use racial or gender quotas in hiring, promotions, or pay decisions, which Fishback said will disqualify about 24 stocks. But we won't give up on these companies, he said. The fund will launch public campaigns and seek to engage behind the scenes to pressure companies to drop their DEI policies. He's planning an accompanying podcast and live streams on X, leaning into the wave of the very online retail investors whose rightward leanings have been sharpened over the past year. We'll make our case in the marketplace of ideas, he said. We're also going to make some noise. There are already a handful of ideologically conservative S&P 500 trackers. They've attracted little money and charge high fees. The America First ETF, which invests in the 150 companies whose employees or corporate PACs have donated the most to Republican candidates, has $23 million in assets, charges 24 times what BlackRock charges for its S&P 500 fund, and has performed slightly worse than the index this year. Fishback said he'll unveil his corporate target at a Mar-a-Lago event next week. Fishback is a Gen Z MAGA avatar, articulate, combative, conservative, and very online. In recent weeks, he has talked up Trump's government efficiency czars Musk and Ramaswamy in the Washington Post and endorsed Trump's ultimate pick for Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He has spoken out against what he sees as an ideological censorship in high school debates and written for the Free Press, Barry Weiss' popular outlet with Silicon Valley and Wall Street conservatives. And he's thrown his hat into the ring to replace Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, Trump's nominee for Secretary of State, and requested a meeting with Governor Ron DeSantis, who will fill the seat. You miss all the shots you don't take, he said. Brazoria is planning more funds, including one that keeps a sleeve of cash to buy stocks that fall sharply, ticker BTFD, Google it, and one that invests in companies that should benefit from the economic reforms of Javier Milei, Argentina's right-wing populist president and Trump superfan. Fishback's fight with Greenlight is essentially about whether he was or was not head of macro trading at the hedge fund. He says he was responsible for, among other profitable investments, a bet that the Federal Reserve would raise interest rates more quickly than the market expected. In our conversation, I pointed out that excluding 24 companies from an index fund because of their hiring policies is about as far from macro as investing gets. Macro means big picture, he said. I can't think of something more big picture than ideologues steering some of the world's best companies in a way that is entirely inconsistent with the past 100 years of value creation. Before November 5th, the MAGA movement looked to be running out of steam, says Liz. Shares of Public Square and Amazon for the Life, Family, and Freedom crowd had cratered. Trump's crypto venture, World Liberty Financial, slashed its fundraising goal by 90% on weak demand for its tokens. Bill Ackman's efforts to parlay his far-right stardom into an IPO of his hedge fund had failed. Even Ramaswamy's anti-woke investment firm had dialed back the ideological rhetoric after realizing its image as political over-investment oriented was hurting its fundraising, Semaphore reported. Yes, conservative activist Robbie Starbuck has pressured companies, including Walmart this week, to drop some DEI policies, but the ideological economy that conservatives have been calling for hadn't materialized. As I wrote last year, owning the libs turned out to be expensive and not that profitable. But Trump's win has given the movement new energy. 1789 Capital, a venture firm backed by Donald Trump Jr. and several conservative donors, is off investing patriotic capital in what it calls EIG, entrepreneurship, innovation, and growth. Bitcoin is up 40% since Election Day. Shares of conservative streaming platform Rumble are up 30%. Brands cannot ignore this forever, its CEO said last week, touting new advertising deals in the pipeline. Conservative pitches only really work if they're pushing against a perceived liberal establishment. The retreat of BlackRock from progressive politics removes a boogeyman. Trump Jr.'s pitch for Public Square, it's time to invest in companies that don't hate you, may be less effective when those companies are running away from DEI as quickly as they can and their CEOs are cozying up to the new administration. Again, that's over at semaphore.com. Over at arstechnica.com, they worry a little bit about Europe. Workers strike as Volkswagen plans to close German factories. Volkswagen wants to close 3 plants in Germany, causing the largest walkout since 2018. This is by Jonathan M. Gitlin. Volkswagen workers in Germany have gone on strike in the largest industrial action taken against the company since 2018. The union IG Metall, which represents about 120,000 Volkswagen workers, voted to approve the strike on November 22nd, describing the situation as the toughest collective bargaining battle Volkswagen has ever seen. IG Metall's members are striking in response to Volkswagen's plans to cut its European manufacturing costs, which are dragging on the company at the same time as the Chinese market has become more difficult due to domestic competition, as well as a softening of global demand for electric vehicles. Volkswagen's response to these tough times has been a proposed 10% pay cut, thousands of layoffs, and the closure of 3 German factories. First time such a thing will have happened in the company's 87-year history. IG Metall, together with VW's works councils, which have an unusually large amount of power compared to workers even at other German automakers, had proposed $1.6 billion in cost savings. This proposal included no bonuses for staff or management, and some forewent pay raises in favor of shorter working hours at some plants. But VW management rejected the suggestion, saying it would not result in long-term financial relief. Volkswagen has set fire to our collective agreements, and instead of extinguishing this fire in 3 collective bargaining sessions, the management board is throwing open barrels of petrol into it, said IG Metall spokesperson Thorsten Greger. VW says it respects the rights of employees who take part in the warning strikes. VW sent ours a statement saying, "We want to keep the impact of the warning strike on our customers, our partners, and in our industrial plants as low as possible. For this reason, the company has already taken targeted measures in advance to ensure emergency operations. The company will provide information on further developments. At the same time, we're using our internal communication channels to inform all employees transparently about the current situation." And that's over at arstechnica.com. Over at OANN.com, that's One America News, Musk highlights the enormous cost of illegal immigration to U.S. taxpayers. Illegal immigration has cost American taxpayers a blistering 2.6% of the entire U.S. government's $6.1 trillion in federal spending for the entire 2023 fiscal year. This amounts to $150.7 billion, according to Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. In 2023 alone, illegal immigration cost taxpayers $150.7 billion. To put this in context with other costs adjusted for inflation, World War I cost $334 billion. The Apollo space program, $257 billion. Manhattan Project, $30 billion. Panama Canal, $15.2 billion. Hoover Dam, $1 billion. The staggering amount of cash going toward illegal immigrants entering and living in the U.S. would rival spending across other agencies. The DOGE X account, which frequently shares other examples of apparently reckless government spending, provided inflation-adjusted comparisons with other major undertakings, such as the atomic bomb Manhattan Project and the cost of constructing the Hoover Dam. Besides illegal immigration, DOGE's account has also targeted the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, California High-Speed Rail Project, and grants for diversity in foreign nations. The agency even went after the federal government for deciding to spend $2.5 million on a Super Bowl ad for this census. Musk's account attacks the federal government for using only 12% of the space in their agency's headquarters in Washington, D.C., as an alarming amount of workers never returned back to the office after the COVID pandemic. While the government still pays money for these office spaces, much of it goes unused or only partially utilized by employees. Additionally, in the social media post sent out Monday evening about immigrants, Musk and Ramaswamy noted the comparison of this spending to other massive initiatives throughout U.S. history. For example, the Apollo space program cost $257 billion when adjusted for inflation, which is about $1 billion more than what illegal immigrants cost taxpayers last year. The crisis also cost, over the course of just 1 year, over $120 billion more than the top-secret World War II program to develop the first atomic bombs. The Manhattan Project cost $30 billion when adjusted for inflation. Furthermore, the Hoover Dam cost only $1 billion, the ex-post notes. However, Musk and Ramaswamy aren't necessarily looking to slash every program or initiative they analyze or attack on social media. Another eye-opening fact was that the U.S. spent $150.7 billion on illegal immigration in 2023, which equals close to 19% of the entire U.S. defense spending in the same year. That's over at One American News, OANN.com. Well, here we go again with the whole resist thing. Judge accused of willful misconduct for allegedly allowing illegal migrant to flee courtroom. This is over at dailycaller.com and it's by Jason Hopkins. A Massachusetts judge who previously faced felony charges for allegedly helping an illegal migrant escape apprehension from federal immigration authorities is once again facing a reprimand for the incident. Judge Shelley M. Richmond Joseph engaged in willful judicial misconduct and committed actions that were unbecoming of a judicial officer, according to formal charges filed Monday by the Massachusetts Commission on Judicial Conduct. The charges, which have been lodged with the state Supreme Judicial Court, relate to a 2018 court case in which Joseph allegedly allowed an illegal migrant in her courtroom to flee through a back door to avoid deportation officers waiting outside. The commission charges that Judge Joseph has engaged in willful judicial misconduct that brought the judicial office in disrepute, as well as conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice and unbecoming a judicial officer, according to a portion of the report by the Commission on Judicial Conduct. The charges mark the latest development in what has become a years-long court slog for Joseph, with the case also highlighting the legal limitations for any local officials who wish to buck federal immigration enforcement cooperation. The incident occurred on April 2nd, 2018, when an Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's ICE, officer arrived at the Newton District Court where Joseph served on the bench to apprehend Jose Medina Perez, an illegal migrant from the Dominican Republic who had previously been deported on 2 different occasions and was barred from re-entering the U.S. for 20 years. Local authorities had arrested Medina Perez in Newton, Massachusetts on narcotics charges and linked him to a warrant for DUI in Pennsylvania, which explained why he was at the Newton District Court on that day. As is typical for many immigration courthouse apprehensions, the ICE officer was waiting for him to be bailed out so then he could be apprehended. However, instead of letting Medina Perez out through the courtroom lobby, the judge allegedly instructed him to be released through the rear exit, which leads to a parking lot. The alleged scheme took place after Joseph had asked the clerk to turn off the court recorder during a sidebar conversation with Medina Perez's defense attorney and assistant district attorney. This order to leave through the rear exit was never relayed over to the ICE officer, who waited in the lobby for hours and ultimately left without apprehending Medina Perez. I heard about it the same day it happened. Thomas Homan, the acting director of ICE at the time, said about the situation. I was dumbfounded. I said, well, now things are going a bit too far for an officer of the court to help someone escape ICE arrest. I've done this 35 years and never seen anything like that, said Homan, who is now slated to serve as border czar under the new Trump administration. Prosecutors charged Joseph in April 2019 with conspiracy to obstruct justice and obstruction of justice for her actions. Joseph maintained her innocence and fought the charges until federal prosecutors in September of 2022 agreed to drop the case. In exchange for dropping the charges, she agreed to refer herself to the Commission on Judicial Conduct, which is tasked with investigating misconduct allegations by members of the bench. The Commission ultimately found her responsible for a litany of misconduct surrounding the 2018 incident and for subsequent actions, including a failure to cooperate and be candid and honest with judicial disciplinary authorities. Again, that's over at dailycaller.com. Over at judicialwatch.org, court finds Fani Willis in default in open records lawsuit, orders her to produce records in 5 business days. Judicial Watch announced that the Superior Court in Fulton County, Georgia, entered an order granting a motion for the default judgment against District Attorney Fani Willis in Judicial Watch's lawsuit for communications Willis had with Special Counsel Jack Smith and the House January 6th Committee. In doing so, the court grants Judicial Watch's request for attorney's fees and orders Willis to search for and provide releasable records to Judicial Watch within 5 business days. The March 2024 lawsuit was filed in the Superior Court of Fulton County, Georgia, after Willis and the county denied having any records responsive to an August 2023 Georgia Open Records Act request for communications with the Special Counsel's Office and or the January 6th Committee. In its lawsuit, Judicial Watch stated that Willis's representation about not having records responsive to the request is likely false. Judicial Watch referred to a December 5th, 2023 letter from House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan to Willis that cites a December 2021 letter from Willis to then House January 6th Committee Chairman Benny Thompson, Democrat from Mississippi. In that letter, Willis requested assistance from the committee and offered to travel to D.C. In May of 2024, Judicial Watch asked the court to declare a default judgment, noting that Willis was served with the lawsuit in March 2024 and had not filed an answer, which was due 30 days after service. The recently issued default judgment states, the court finds defendant Willis in her official capacity is in default and has been since April 11th, 2024. Further, Willis never moved to open default on any basis, not even during the period which she could have opened default as a matter of right. She never paid costs, and she never offered up a meritorious defense. Plaintiff is thus entitled to judgment by default, as if every item and paragraph of the complaint were supported by proper and sufficient evidence. Here, this means plaintiff has established that defendant violated the Open Records Act by failing to either turn over responsive records or else notify plaintiff of her decision to withhold some or all of such records. In its complaint, plaintiff sought the following relief: a declaration that the defendant has violated the Open Records Act, an order for defendant to search all records responsive to plaintiff's request without further delay, an injunction ordering defendant to cease withholding non-exempt public records responsive to the request, an award of attorney's fees and costs pursuant to Georgia Section 501873B, a writ of mandamus ordering defendant to provide the requested records, and any other relief the court deems proper. By finding defendant in default, the court has in effect declared that she has violated the Open Records Act. Court also hereby orders defendant to conduct a diligent search of her records for responsive materials within 5 business days of the entry of this order. Within that same 5-day period, defendant is ordered to provide plaintiff with copies of all responsive records that are not legally exempted or accepted from disclosure. If defendant is required or decides to withhold all or part of requested record, she should follow the procedures set forth in the Open Records Act. If the records are stored electronically, they may be produced electronically in a commonly used format such as PDF. Court expects that such production will include the correspondence identified by plaintiff in its complaint. If it does not, defendant is further ordered to provide an explanation why such correspondence does not exist in defendant's records or why it's being withheld. Beyond that, no other relief, injunctive or otherwise, is necessary at this time, to include striking defendant's answer, which is of no effect based on the court's finding of default. Court set a hearing on the Judicial Watch attorney's fees award for December 20th. Fani Willis is something else. We've been doing this work for 30 years, and this is the first time in our experience a government official has been found in default for not showing up in court to answer an open records lawsuit, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton said. Judicial Watch looks forward to getting any documents from Fani Willis' operation about collusion with the Biden administration and Nancy Pelosi's Congress on her unprecedented and compromised Get Trump prosecution. Judicial Watch is assisted in the case by John Monroe of John Monroe Law in Georgia. Judicial Watch has several Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, lawsuits related to the prosecutorial abuse targeting Trump. In February of 2024, the U.S. Department of Justice asked a federal court to allow the agency to keep secret the names of top staffers working in special counsel Jack Smith's office that's targeting former President Donald Trump and other Americans. Before his appointment to investigate and prosecute Trump, special counsel Jack Smith previously was at the center of several controversial issues, IRS scandal among them. In 2014, a Judicial Watch investigation revealed that top IRS officials had been in communication with Jack Smith's then Public Integrity section about a plan to launch criminal investigations into conservative, tax-exempt groups. There's a link to that story. In January 2024, Judicial Watch filed a lawsuit against Fulton County, Georgia, for records regarding the hiring of Nathan Wade as a special prosecutor by District Attorney Fani Willis. Wade was hired to pursue unprecedented criminal investigations and prosecutions against former President Trump and others over the 2020 election disputes. In October of 2023, Judicial Watch sued the DOJ for records and communications between the Office of U.S. Special Counsel Jack Smith and the Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney's Office regarding requests and receipt of federal funding/assistance in the investigation of former President Trump and his 18 co-defendants in the Fulton County indictment of August 14, 2023. To date, the DOJ is refusing to confirm or deny the existence of records, claiming that to do so would interfere with enforcement proceedings. Judicial Watch's litigation challenge this is continuing. Through the New York Freedom of Information Law in July 2023, Judicial Watch received the engagement letter showing New York County District Attorney Alvin L. Bragg paid $900 per hour for partners and $500 per hour for associates to the Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher law firm for the purposes of suing Representative Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, in an effort to shut down the House Judiciary Committee's oversight investigation into Bragg's unprecedented indictment of former President Donald Trump. Anyway, that story is over at judicialwatch.org.
So Burisma was a tool to be able to supplement the Western LNG with an endogenous and at-home Ukrainian alternative gas supply so that the sanctions could go through in Europe and so that Ukraine would not be reliant on Russia to have cheap natural gas. But this required Naftogaz, the state-owned Ukrainian gas company, which George Soros has been locked in a power struggle with Putin over privatization for decades. And Burisma was the largest of the private for-profit firms that had the rights, the gas rights for exploitation of eastern Ukraine and the surrounding Crimea offshore gas supplies. And so Burisma was seen as an instrument of statecraft by the U.S. State Department to economically bankrupt Russia and to militarily shut down Russia's war machine as part of the larger play for Naftogaz and to build up Ukraine's innate gas supplies, which were underexploited, in part because of a military tension over who actually controls that territory. That's why the Donbass is so important. That's why after the counter-coup, the U.S. was sponsoring this is what the military the military assistance impeachment of Trump was about in 2019. We weren't at war with Russia then, right? This is 2019. This is 3 years before the outbreak. We were sponsoring the military reconquest of that region because that's where the energy resources are. The population's mostly in the West. The resources are mostly in the East. It's the same thing with China and Xinjiang in terms of that dichotomy. And so this is, when Hunter Biden said, when he was asked what he was doing on Burisma and whether he felt shame about it, he said he was doing a patriotic duty for his country. Burisma was an instrument of statecraft for the State Department. What they were doing is they were building that up. That's why they had funding from U.S. aid. Again, the CIA funding conduit was working with the Atlantic Council with 7 CIA directors on its board. Hunter Biden's on the chairman's advisory board of the NDI. Hunter Biden's law firm even has, this just broke 4 months ago. Hunter Biden's law firm actually had wrote a pitch to the U.S. State Department for how Burisma could serve as as basically a vassal for U.S. State Department interests in the region. You had Burisma's back channeling with the U.S. ambassador in Rome on similar grounds in terms of the Italy Greece supplies. But what you have here is a private sector for-profit company. Many such cases, by the way, because not only was Hunter Biden on the board of Burisma as chairman's advisory board of the CIA's DNC cutout, but who else was on the board of directors right next to Hunter Biden? Cofer Black, who spent 30 years in the CIA, won CIA Distinguished Medals Awards. You can read the Daily Beast article where Cofer Black is described as Mitt Romney's Sherpa to the intelligence community to get the CIA's blessing to back him against Barack Obama. What is this CIA luminary doing on the board of Burisma? What is Hunter Biden, who the CIA personally calls the Justice Department off investigating his funding sources and is on the chairman's advisory board of the CIA cutout? It's because, just like we have done since the 1940s, it is a dual use entity. It's a for-profit standalone private sector firm, but it's also an instrument of statecraft because every dollar that Burisma generates is one less dollar that Gazprom generates. And so it's the best job in the world if you can get it. It's you get to keep all the profits, and you are getting the backing of the battering ram of the blob.
SarahCarter.com had this story: Canada beefs up border security after Trump threatened sweeping tariffs. In November, President-elect Donald Trump announced on social media that he would impose a 25% tariff on all products from Canada and Mexico if they did not take active roles in containing illegal immigration, as well as the level of illicit drugs entering into the United States. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met with Trump at his residence in Mar-a-Lago, after which the Canadian government vowed to secure the border. We got, I think, a mutual understanding of what they're concerned about in terms of border security. Minister of Public Safety Dominic LeBlanc, who accompanied Trudeau at Mar-a-Lago, said of the meeting in an interview with Canadian media, "All of our concerns are shared by Canadians and by the government of Canada." We talked about the security posture currently at the border that we believe to be effective, and we also discussed additional measures and visible measures that we're going to put in place over the coming weeks, LeBlanc continued. And we also established Rosemary, a personal series of rapport that I think will continue to allow us to make that case. The Daily Caller News Foundation reports the Royal Canadian Mounted Police is preparing to beef up its immigration enforcement capabilities by hiring more staff, adding more vehicles, and creating more processing facilities in the chance that there is an illegal immigration surge sparked by Trump's presidential election victory. The moves are a change in direction from Trudeau's public declaration in January of 2017 that Canada was a welcoming country and that diversity is our strength, just days after Trump was sworn into office the first time. The Daily Caller notes the differences in response from Canadian government versus Mexico's. Trudeau's recent overtures largely differ from Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, who's indicated she's not willing to bend the knee to Trump's tariff threats. The Mexican leader in November said there will be a response in kind to any tariff levied on Mexican goods going into the U.S., and she appeared to deny the president-elect's claim that she'd agreed to do more to beef up border security in a recent phone call. That's over at sarahcarter.com. A lot of moving and shaking over in the tech sector this past week. Over at TheVerge.com is this story: 2 data brokers banned from selling sensitive location data by the FTC. Precise location data from advertising IDs and mobile apps can be used for surveillance that, according to the FTC, puts millions of Americans at risk. This is by Umar Shakir. Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, is banning data brokers Gravy Analytics and Mobilewalla from collecting, using, and selling sensitive location data of Americans, the agency announced on Tuesday. The FTC targeted Gravy Analytics, its subsidiary Ventel, and Mobilewalla for allegedly violating the FTC Act by collecting and selling information that could be used to track people to healthcare facilities, military bases, religious sites, labor union gatherings, and other sensitive locations. The FTC says Mobilewalla relied primarily on consumer information that Mobilewalla collected from real-time bidding exchanges by bidding to show people personalized ads on their mobile devices and then retaining tracking info identifying them. It also bought info from other sources and used additional data to build out the profiles attached to each advertising ID. Combining that data, according to the complaint, allowed Mobilewalla to create audience segments targeting pregnant women, as well as provide analysis of the people who attended protests over the death of George Floyd. Meanwhile, Ventel's scheme is explained as collecting location data from otherwise ordinary mobile apps and then selling access to that data to other businesses or government agencies. 404 Media reports that the IRS, DEA, FBI, CBP, and ICE have all purchased Ventel data. Now, the companies must comply by never selling, disclosing, or using sensitive location data in any product or service and must establish a sensitive data location program. Mobilewalla's proposed settlement order will prohibit the company from misrepresenting how it collects, maintains, uses, deletes, or discloses consumers' personal information and the extent to which consumers' location data is de-identified. Using, transferring, selling, and disclosing sensitive location data from health clinics, religious organizations, correctional facilities, labor union offices, LGBTQ plus related locations, political gatherings, and military installations. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, who led efforts to target a loophole data brokers use to sell sensitive personal data on the market, applauded the FTC and the CFPB for limiting what the companies can collect. In a statement sent to The Verge, Wyden said these companies could sell information about law enforcement, judges, and members of the armed forces on the open market to anyone with a credit card, putting judges and military personnel in danger. Wyden also said U.S. government agencies spied on Americans by obtaining this data without a warrant. Many federal agencies hid behind the flimsy claim that Americans consented to the sale of their data, but the FTC orders make it clear how untrue these claims were, said Wyden. I'll leave the link to this and all the stories I cover on Atomic Biscuits out on my account, BACFA, on Gab. The United States expands curbs on China's AI memory and chip tools, raising supply chain concerns. This is over at CIO.com. The rules impose export restrictions on equipment from manufacturers in countries including Israel, Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. The U.S. has announced sweeping new measures targeting China's semiconductor sector, restricting the export of chip-making equipment and high-bandwidth memory. This move has sparked concerns over potential supply chain disruptions. The rules impose export restrictions on equipment from manufacturers in countries including Israel, Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, while granting exemptions to firms in Japan and the Netherlands. Among those exempted are Japan's Tokyo Electron and the Netherlands' ASML, two leading chip-making equipment manufacturers. This exemption reportedly resulted from extensive negotiations between their governments and Washington. High bandwidth memory, or HBM, critical for artificial intelligence chips and including versions like HBM2, is produced by companies such as South Korea's Samsung and SK Hynix alongside US-based Micron. The updated measures have also added 140 Chinese entities to a blacklist, targeting firms seen as pivotal to Beijing's ambitions for semiconductor self-sufficiency through advanced manufacturing technologies. We are constantly talking to our allies and partners as well as reassessing and updating our controls, Alan Estevez, Under Secretary of Commerce for Industry and Security, said in a statement. Today's announcement represents the next step in that ongoing work. The latest rules broaden restrictions to include 24 additional types of chip-making tools previously outside their scope. The key feature of the new sanctions is the Foreign Direct Product Rule, which allows the U.S. to impose export controls on foreign-made products containing U.S. technology, increasing the scope of restrictions, said Manish Rawat, semiconductor analyst at Tech Insights. This is significant as major U.S. toolmakers have responded to the restrictions by ramping up efforts to expand manufacturing outside the U.S., according to a recent report by Gregory Allen, an AI expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the CSIS. Both KLA Corporation and Applied Materials have committed to major expansions of their Singapore manufacturing facilities, while Lam Research has built out its largest manufacturing site in Malaysia, Allen wrote. Lam Research has said on its website that its initial investment suggests the impact of the newly announced measures on its business will align largely with its earlier expectations. The latest restrictions target AI chip manufacturing, reflecting concerns over potential military applications of the technology in China. The measures seek to limit Beijing's access to advanced memory and chip-making tools, further tightening control over critical semiconductor technologies. However, in practice, the inability to import high-end memory and chip manufacturing equipment risks putting much of Asia at a temporary disadvantage as Chinese-based vendors and manufacturers are cut off from basic chip-making equipment in the short term, and factories outside of China have maxed out their production capacity, said Hyun Park, CEO and chief analyst at Amalgam Insights. While exemptions granted to Dutch and Japanese firms soften the blow, the restrictions intensify challenges for other Asian nations. Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan are now under pressure to align with either the U.S. or China in the global semiconductor supply chain showdown. Samsung, in particular, is in a bind as it has struggled to gain a foothold in AI and now has to give up one of its largest markets in China, said Park, referring to the significant share of Samsung's HBM chip sales generated in the Chinese market. The inclusion of memory manufacturers also marks a shift in focus from semiconductor fabrication to critical components, which are essential for AI chip production, targeting China's ability to scale its AI capabilities, Rawat added. Restrictions on critical AI components such as HBM and advanced chips from Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron are expected to disrupt AI research and development efforts. Tech firms, especially those involved in AI training and inference, may experience delays and higher costs in acquiring these essential components, Rawat said. Similarly, server and PC chip shortages are exacerbated by restrictions on chip-making tools, making it harder for Chinese manufacturers to produce advanced chips for servers and high-performance systems, potentially leading to delays or reliance on less advanced nodes. The resulting supply constraints could drive up chip prices, squeezing profit margins for enterprise technology companies or increasing costs for customers, ultimately impacting competitiveness in the market. To navigate these challenges, firms may be forced to diversify their supply chains, identify alternative suppliers, and adapt procurement strategies. However, finding replacements for advanced semiconductors may be costly and difficult, further raising operational expenses. China is ramping up efforts to achieve semiconductor self-sufficiency as the U.S. and its allies impose tighter restrictions on advanced chips and manufacturing equipment. While Beijing remains behind industry leaders like NVIDIA in AI chip design and ASML in chip-making tools, analysts suggest it could dominate the legacy node market, which is not heavily targeted by these restrictions. China will likely become a powerhouse for the legacy nodes as they have a lot of capacity, and they might reduce the prices, said Parikh Jain, CEO of Parikh Consulting. Simultaneously, the impact will be that more of the lower power advanced nodes might remain with the countries like US and Taiwan. This shift underscores China's potential to solidify its role in older semiconductor technologies, while advanced chipmaking remains concentrated in regions such as the United States and Taiwan. Engadget.com has the story China has banned certain metal exports in retaliation to the U.S. chip restrictions. As of today, Chinese gallium, germanium, and antimony are no longer being exported to the United States. Germanium and gallium exports had already ceased in October, and antimony exports have dropped by 97% since September. This official declaration comes a day after the U.S. announced it would further tighten technological exports to China, particularly referring to computer chips. This ban includes materials that have potential military applications, per Reuters. The Chinese export ban primarily concerns what the government calls dual-use items, which are objects both the military and civilians can use. Due to this ban, graphite exports to the U.S. from China must also undergo stricter reviews. However, they aren't outright banned from exporting yet. Gallium and germanium are used to make semiconductors, and the latter can also be found in fiber optic cables and solar cells. As for antimony, you may also find it in shotgun shells, nuclear weapons, night vision goggles, and some batteries. These export bans are significant because China has been outputting 48% of globally mined antimony, 59.2% of refined germanium, and 98.8% of refined gallium production. The U.S. must now scramble to locate new deposits containing these materials, as the ban has already affected prices. Antimony trioxide has been 228% more expensive since the beginning of this year. China has been finding ways to be technologically independent since the U.S. banned exports to the central nation. The results of such efforts include Harmony OS, Huawei's chips being used in AI development, and the Baidu navigation satellite system. ChatGPT's search results for news are unpredictable and frequently inaccurate. Researchers say that despite a confident tone, OpenAI's chatbot search gave partially or entirely incorrect responses to most of their requests. This is by Wes Davis over at TheVerge.com. Based on testing done by Columbia's Toe Center for Digital Journalism researchers, OpenAI's ChatGPT search tool has some issues when it comes to responding with the truth. OpenAI launched the tool for subscribers in October, saying it could give fast, timely answers with links to relevant web sources. Instead, Futurism points out that the researchers said ChatGPT search struggled to correctly identify quotes from articles, even when they came from publishers with arrangements to share data with OpenAI. The authors asked ChatGPT to identify the source of 200 quotes from 20 publications. 40 of those quotes were taken from publishers who disallowed OpenAI's search crawler from accessing their site. Yet the chatbot confidently replied with false information anyway, rarely admitting it was unsure about the details it gave. In total, ChatGPT returned partially or entirely incorrect responses on 153 occasions, though it only acknowledged an inability to accurately respond to a query 7 times. Only in those 7 outputs did the chatbot use qualifying words and phrases like appears, it's possible, or might, or statements like I couldn't locate the exact article. The Tow Center's test authors documented ChatGPT search results that misattributed a letter to the editor quote from the Orlando Sentinel to a story published in Time magazine. In another example, when asked to identify the source of a quote from a New York Times article about endangered whales, it returned a link to a different website that had wholly plagiarized the story. Misattribution is hard to address without the data and methodology that the Tow Center withheld, OpenAI told the Columbia Journalism Review, and the study represents an atypical test of our product. The company went on to promise to keep enhancing search results. That's over at TheVerge.com.
And I should have believed it. She said we had to blow. She was the apple of my eye. It wasn't long ago, now you've been set free. Another month or so you'll be poisoning me. Love is a smile. I see you slither away with the skin in your tail, your flickering tongue and your rattling scales like a real red sign. Oh, go now, you've been set free. Another month or so you'll be poisoning me. Love is a smile. I see you slither away with your skin and your tail, your flickering tongue and your rattling scale like a real red sign.
Well, that's all the time we have for this episode of Atomic Biscuits. I wanted to thank you for coming by and sharing this hour with me on this station. Please come on back next week for another healthy dose of Atomic Biscuits. Have a great December, everyone. We'll see you next time. So long.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as Bitchute, Rumble, D-Live and Odysee. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.